Thank you. So before I get started, I'd just like to say that I'm honored to be able to share this sermon with you today. And if you were here last year, and remember, I ended up going a week before my scheduled date. So I'd like to also thank Wayne for remembering to schedule his early morning tea time on the correct Sunday this year. So we're continuing on today with our Sermon on the Mount series entitled Salty and Lit. And again, the idea behind that is that we become salty and lit Christians, where people are using our lives to enhance relationships and using our light to show a path to Jesus. So today our focus is going to be something that we all do, something probably some of us love to do, and that is judging others. Now, I will say, after all the time I've spent preparing this sermon, I have never been more aware of the judgments that I make against other people. But I'd like to start out with a little exercise, allow you to flex your judging muscles, and I want you to try to create an image of a person in your mind based on the following information. This person lives in a house that they purchased for a little over $30,000. This person, if they buy or they go out to breakfast, will never spend more than $4. They bought their car because it was discounted due to being damaged in a storm. And lastly, they treated a friend to lunch at McDonald's because they had a coupon. So now, do you have somewhat of an image in your mind? Now, I don't want to give you much information to kind of build that image from, but normally when we meet or see someone new, we don't really have much information, or sometimes none, to go off of. But yet we'll still make a judgment towards them. But based on the information that I gave you, maybe you're thinking to yourself, you're thinking of someone who's poor, living in this rundown shack of a house. Maybe you're thinking of someone who's cheap, frugal when it comes to money. But how many of you pictured this guy? Surprise? Warren Buffett, who at the time of writing this had a net worth of $84.6 billion with a B dollars. Now, he did purchase his house for $31,500. Now, granted, that was back in 1958, so it's worth a little bit more today. But the fact remains is that he still lives in that house. Depending on how prosperous a billionaire can feel, he will buy one of 3 McDonald's breakfasts, never spending more than $3.17. He bought his car specifically because it was discounted due to being damaged by hail. Because to Warren Buffett, cars are a bad investment. And I think he knows a thing or two about a good investment. Lastly, that friend that he treated to lunch, that was this guy. Number 2 richest man in the world, Bill Gates. So roughly $200 billion having lunch at McDonald's using a coupon. And in that picture, they're actually in Hong Kong. So they traveled halfway around the world to still end up at McDonald's. So, how did your judgment change after finding out who it was I was describing? Would you judge Warren Buffett differently now based on those facts? Of course not. I mean, he's the epitome of business success, right? And he's not one to showcase or flaunt his wealth. In fact, he's chosen to give away most of his fortune. This example right here is why we need to be careful about the judgments that we make about someone. Until we have the complete story, the judgments we make can be quite inaccurate. So if you turn to page 788 of your roll Bibles, today we'll be focusing on Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 through 6. It's also available in the YouVersion Bible app, or if you choose none of those and just prefer to hear my angelic voice, I will also have them on the screen for your viewing pleasure. So verse 1 starts, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use it, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank that is in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your own eye, and and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. So now I took these verses, and I broke them down into 3 parts. So looking at verses 1 and 2, to me, the first verse sums this whole thing up perfectly. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. One could think that's all that needs to be said about the topic. Do I want people to judge me? Of course not. So I'm not going to pass judgment on others. Case closed. Church is over. Now go home. But yet each and every one of us make judgments against others. And we probably do it every day, whether we know it or not. You might even be making a judgment at this very moment. Maybe even me. Maybe you're thinking to yourself, it looks like he just walked out of a Calvin Klein ad. Or maybe you're thinking, I bet he is the Tom Brady of fantasy football, because all he does is win. Or something like that. And those just randomly came to me. I don't have them written down here or anything. Now think back to when you met someone, or even saw someone for the very first time. Or better yet, in the spirit of the season, imagine you're at the fair. The Holy Grail, the Mecca for judging other people. Right? Either way, the person that you're judging probably hasn't left their house since the last fair. Either way, you know nothing about them. But what's the first thing you do? You get into the official judgment stance that I just made up, and you look at them up and down. But what are you looking at? You're looking at their clothes, their shoes, their hair. Are they clean? Are they dirty? Whatever it is that you can see on the surface. And then, bam, you have your list of judgments. But is that fair to judge someone just by what you see on the outside? In John chapter 7, verse 24, Jesus says, stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly. So we can't possibly make an accurate judgment about someone based solely on what we see on the outside. We need to get to know that person. We need to learn their story, because the outside only makes up a small percent of who we truly are. But it's important that we also acknowledge and recognize that we're making this judgment and ask ourselves, why am I judging this person based only on what I see and not what I know? See, by being conscious of these thoughts, it can help you stop the judgments you're making about them right then and there. Because they're simply just another person living their life in the best way they could in that moment. Now, verse 2, again, says, for in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use it, it will be measured to you. Now remember, this is Jesus himself giving this sermon. And he is a man who lived by the words that he preached. Think back to all the stories, all the instances of Jesus helping others. In Matthew chapter 8, right after coming down from giving the Sermon on the Mount, he healed a man with leprosy. In John chapter 8, he forgives a sinful woman who committed adultery and gave her a new start at life. Now those are just 2 examples. And while the rest of society placed judgment by ignoring or condemning these people based on their one individual flaw, Jesus talked with them. He spent time with them. And he, most importantly, he treated them like the human beings that they were. This highlights exactly what he said when he said not to judge by mere appearances, but to instead judge correctly. I've heard Wayne say this a few times, and he will ask Jesus to help him see the people the way that Jesus does. And if we look and we see people the way Jesus did, then we'll make no mistakes when it comes to our judgments. Now, verses 3 through 5, again, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Now, these verses to me paint such a clear picture of what Jesus is trying to say here. Right? How can you possibly remove something so small like this speck of sawdust from someone's eye when you essentially have a 2x4 sticking out of yours? We do it because it's easy for us to find the negatives, the flaws, sins, imperfections in others, right? Like those little specks of sawdust. And if we focus on those anytime we're around someone, it helps us to minimize our own sins and imperfections, right? Which most of the time are far bigger, like the plank, than those of the person or the judgments we're making against someone else. But now let's look at this from a different angle. What if the speck of sawdust in the other person's eye is from the plank that's sticking out of your eye? Right? So where I'm going with this, what if someone's new to church, new to Jesus, and they look at us, longtime Christians and followers of Jesus, and they see us doing something that is not at all Christian-like. In their mind, they might be thinking, that doesn't seem right, but if they're doing it, I guess then maybe it's okay. We've now just transplanted the speck into their eye. Well, now, down the road, we might see this person doing the very same thing that we were doing, but they saw us do. And then we'll make a judgment against them, not realizing that we are the cause of that action. Now in Luke chapter 18, verses 10 through 14, Jesus tells a parable that I feel echoes this, exactly what he's saying in these verses. He says, 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give a tenth of all I get. But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. I tell you that this one, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. The Pharisee saw himself as being better than others. He's thankful he's not like other people. But who's he saying? He's thankful he's not. Robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even the tax collector was standing right up there with him. So yeah, in comparison, against that crew, of course he looks like he's a better person. But all he's really doing is pointing a hypocritical finger at people who are worse off than he is. And by doing that, makes him look better, and it allows him to push his sins and his imperfections right under the rug. Now, we play the role of the Pharisee quite often in our own lives. Make judgments against other people that we think maybe aren't as good as we are in our own eyes. But our sight is clearly obstructed by the plank that's sticking out of it. And the first thing that we need to do when that comes up is we need to ask God to help us see clearly. And the first thing that he's going to do is lead us to the closest mirror. Because we need to examine our own selves, our own faults, our own sins, and fix those first. Now the tax collector, he took a little bit of a different approach. But see, he didn't seem to think he was worthy of being before God, as he wouldn't even look up to heaven. But what he did do was acknowledge his faults and his own sins and ask God to have mercy on him. See, this is what it looks like when the plank is removed from our eye. Now that we can see clearly, we no longer see a person based just on what's on the outside. We know that it's what's on the inside that tells the full story. And with the plank removed, and after we've examined our own faults and our own struggles, and we've worked to correct those, then we are able to now help others remove the speck from their eye. And even though we'll never fully be able to heal or rid ourselves of sins, we just need to remember that every day God is working in everyone's life for the better, including our own. And if we continue to look at that perspective before we make a judgment, that will only make it easier to not do that. So verse 6, again, do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Now, my first thought when reading that verse is, what? So I went back and read it again the second time. I was more confused than I was the first. And I was just confused the next 10 times I read it. I feel like this verse is straight out of the Wayne Wagner International Version. But after a little research, what I was able to learn is that while today we know dogs as man's best friend, back then they were just looked at as scavengers around town. Right? And in certain cultures today, they're still considered to be a nuisance. But in the context of this verse, they were used to describe those who stopped following Jesus and returned back to their old unbelieving ways. So reading that now seems to make perfect sense, because Jesus is sacred to all of us. And while we want him to be a part of everyone's life, there are those who will simply just not follow him and choose to continue to live their lives in sin. Now, in regard to the pigs, they were considered to be unclean animals. And God, in reference to them, in Leviticus chapter 11, said, "You must not eat their meat or touch their carcasses. They are unclean for you." And when I read that verse, I just laughed because I pictured in my mind this image. And I imagined God as the soup Nazi yelling down to Wayne, saying, "No bacon for you." So the next time you're all enjoying your bacon, just remember, God said, nay, nay. Vegans rule. Well, at least that's what he tells me. Now, pearls, on the other hand, are valuable, right? They're something that we cherish. And like Jesus, we would never just take something that we value and just throw it to the unclean. Now, pigs will also eat any food that's put in front of them. But pearls are not something that we eat. So by giving them something that's not food may anger them and cause them to come after you. Well, the same goes for people. See, there are people out there that just don't see Jesus the way that we do. And by just trying to throw Jesus at them and introduce him into their lives may cause the same reaction as the pig. Instead, we need to be selective on how we share Jesus with people. Like pearls, we're not going to just hand them to anyone, right? But with the right person, we can try to bring Jesus into their life. A wise pastor once told me that any good sermon leaves its listeners with 3 things to take away. And that is exactly what I have for you. And I want you to think of these 3 things the next time you are about to make a judgment on someone. And I want to preface this by saying this may be a judgment that you make towards another, or it could be a judgment that you make upon yourself, because I think they can be applied to both. The first is to stop judging, start loving. See, when we stop judging and start loving, we focus on the positives that people bring into our lives. See, God made each and every one of us different for a reason. And everyone that we meet can bring something positive to our lives. And we, in turn, can do the same for them. Besides, there's far too much negativity in the world today. So a little love from each of us can certainly go a long way. Like the back wall says, love God, love others, serve the world. The next is stop judging and start encouraging or start helping. See, maybe that flaw or imperfection that you're judging someone on, maybe it's something that they are self-conscious of and judge their own selves on. Why not try to make a difference instead? See, the world needs our love and kindness more than it needs our opinions. And whatever their sin may be, whatever their struggle is, be there for them, encourage them, and do whatever you can to help them. The last one is stop judging, start living. When you stop judging and follow the first 2, you can then start living. When we stop being judgmental, we start appreciating people and things for what they are. We can start to live in the present moment, and we can simply enjoy life and be happy. Because isn't that really what we all want? So before our final worship song, here at LCC every week, we take communion to remember the sacrifice that Jesus made for each of us. Now there are 2 tables off to the side and one in back that'll have a cracker and a cup of juice that symbolize the body and the blood of Jesus. The table off to the right here does have a gluten-free option if you do need. And today I want to encourage you to think about the judgments that you make. Jesus lived a perfect life. He taught us and he showed us how to treat people and how to correctly judge others. And even though he was perfect, he still paid the ultimate sacrifice by dying on the cross for the forgiveness of our sins. And even on the cross, he asked God to forgive those who put him there. See, the Bible is our guidebook on how to follow Jesus' lead. And while we'll never be perfect like him, we can take his teachings and apply them in our own lives so that we can see people the way that he did. Let's pray. Dear God, we thank you for the gift of your Son, Jesus, and the examples he set for all of us, for showing us the importance that we should never judge a book by its cover, or in this case, judge a person by strictly what's on the outside. Please help us remove the plank that sticks out of our eye so that we can clearly see the good work that you are doing in each and every one of us. Amen.